New York is tough, forces you to have thick skin. And if you don't have thick skin, it will thicken your skin.
To have the strength and the courage to act, but also to have the humbleness to take feedback.
I think leadership at its core is having a vision.
Customer is always going to want something faster and cheaper.
Knowledge was valued so much that they still paid them the weight of the book of gold.
But sometimes I think we don't know how much opportunity that we have here. We're so privileged and so blessed.
I hope that HabibiTech Summit invites people to accept their power, because we do have power.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and here we are at New York City with the one and only Ramy Noaman, the founder of New York Strategy and HabibiTech, the reason why we're here in New York. How are you feeling?
Alhamdulillah, it's really a pleasure to be here. Thank you guys for coming. I'm glad you're enjoying New York. It's a city that's my home, and I'm happy to make it your home for a few days. So welcome to the city, man.
Well, thank you so much. It's absolutely been a great time. You know, we were at London not too long ago for Muslim Tech Fest. So when we
I was there too, by the way.
Oh man, we barely missed each other then.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, inshallah, next year we'll connect there properly. It was a great time being there, and it's definitely invigorating to see so many builders within the Ummah being present, collaboratively working, and just seeing what's ahead and what they've also achieved.
Absolutely.
When it comes to growing up in New York, were you born and raised?
Through and through.
Wow, how does that feel? Because I feel like very few people can like truly claim that.
I don't know, man. There's probably a few million that could claim that.
Yeah.
New York is cool, man. Alhamdulillah, like I travel a lot. I've lived in a few different cities, Boston, LA, and New York gives you the skills to survive anywhere, right? Potentially to thrive anywhere. You know the famous line, like, if you make it here, you can make it anywhere. I think there's a reason for that. Like, it teaches you a certain grit. It forces you to grapple with the diversity of people and perspectives and problems that are constantly thrown at you. And it makes you adapt. Like, there's hardly a smooth sailing day in New York. So when you grow up in that, you're adept at managing situations. So New York is a skill set. It's a lifestyle, it's a nationality, it's a skill set.
It's a well way to define New York, I think, Billboard. So I think you hit it on the nail. I think there's a way of, I think among my friends that move to New York, there's always a sense of like it's like a second portion of their college experience where you're kind of like forced to grow or you're just going to get left behind. So growing up in New York, has it always been your, I guess, goal to kind of end back here? Or because you have quite a successful pedigree of, you know, going to Harvard and all these other career achievements that you've done. What was New York always the end goal coming back?
Allahu A'lam, man. You know, Allah knows best. I've lived most of my adult life, most of my life period in New York. I've lived in a few other places as well. The past couple of years, I spent a lot of time back in the Muslim world, spending it between Egypt, Saudi, a little bit in the Emirates, a little bit in Turkey. I think the mental model I have is that New York is always going to be home base for me. It's a place that I enjoy spending time. It's a place that whenever you land in JFK, you get the rush just hitting you like it doesn't hit anywhere else. But because New York makes you so adept at navigating other places really well, and because other places have so much value, there's no reason to contain yourself to New York. And so I enjoy when I get to spend like, you know, weeks or months at a time in Cairo or in Istanbul or in Saudi. And I feel like I'm able to reap so much value from those places because I'm not also contained to those places. I have the opportunity to fly in, do what I do, build relationships with people, and then I have New York to come back to. And New York like recharges you, it re-energizes you, and it gives you more ideas, it gives you more things to be involved in that you can convey to the other people that you collaborate with anywhere that you go.
So in the spirit of like collaboration and being in New York, where was, I guess, when it comes to those elements of collaboration and being in the Muslim world, did you really feel that growing up in New York in those years, like early on in your professional career or even academic years of working with other Muslims, or was that kind of missing?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in New York in the 90s, golden era, right? The age of Biggie Smalls. But it was a different time than today. I think today you skip a rock and you'll hit like 3 halal restaurants, 4 Yemeni coffee shops. By the way, we're sponsored by Kahwa House, so we really appreciate the contribution to HabibiTech Summit. But you have so many options because, alhamdulillah, over the last like 2 decades or so, Muslims have popularized their culture. And it wasn't always the case. Like in the 90s, like Muslims were very much a minority. Like we still are, but like we're an increasingly powerful minority today, a more culturally prominent minority. In the New York City area, New York has 8 million people. About 1 million people are Muslim.
Wow.
That's an incredible statistic. And so there's 300 plus masajid across New York City. There are countless halal shops, each one newer than the next. So like feeling like you're at home is easier than ever. But when I was growing up, the places that we take for granted today were like these holes in the walls, scattered, fragmented. If you knew, you knew. And if you didn't, then you were struggling to adjust as well as you could living in a predominantly like North American city. So times are changing. They're changing in a direction that makes it really fun and exciting to be in New York. And when you have so many like ambitious, industrious, creative Muslims that are building value in so many domains, from the hospitality industry, food and beverage, media agencies, tech companies, everyone brings a unique value, even if they're in the same space or if they're in completely different areas. So you have like, in our case, we're building HabibiTech Summit. Do you know the number of people that I've had the opportunity to learn from, grow with, and work with along the way? Like you guys are a podcast. I'm not in the podcast industry. You guys are from another city. You came here because you're working with us in making the HabibiTech weekend more broadly a huge success. We're grateful to you guys for that. There's folks that are, our creative director runs an agency and is in a completely different domain than I am as an AI engineer. We have content creators that we're working with, killing it, doing an amazing job at raising visibility, using their own voices and using their own lenses. We have vendors and suppliers and sponsors from every, conceivable industry. So New York truly behaves as a mecca for talent and opportunity. And it's also what makes New York the perfect place to host HabibiTech Summit. You can't do this in the same spirit anywhere else in the world. I'm 100% confident about that. You couldn't do it. I'm going to take some heat for this. You can't do it in San Francisco in the same spirit. You can't do it in London in the same spirit. You can do versions that are perfectly appropriate for those environments. But every major city is going to have its narrative. It's going to have the things that are natural to it. And New York has its own narrative, its own spirit, its own energy. And the things that are possible in New York, I think, really stand out on a global stage.
What is that differentiation or narrative about New York to you that really exemplifies it as the place to be for AI particularly?
For AI. So New York is one of the leading cities in the world when it comes to VC capital. And those are like statistics that are well known. But New York is also a cosmopolitan city of industries. I think when you look at San Francisco, we often think Silicon Valley is the beacon of tech. And truthfully, like, it is. But New York City, first of all, let's begin by understanding that tech is like a globalized phenomenon. It's not like mining where it's like geographically focused on its origin point. Tech is a globalized phenomenon. But what New York City brings to it is a myriad of use cases on how to apply it where there is a huge amount of money. It provides you with a huge pool of talent because millions of people want to live in New York City. A huge amount of capital, like it's the home. We're literally like a block from Wall Street now. Mm-hmm. There is so much money. There are so many use cases. There's so much talent. And there are so many industries that provide raw materials to create AI-facing products, to create tech products in general, and to arm startups with the resources that they need, the profile they need, and those like concentrated network effects that allow startups to grow very rapidly, especially in industries that are highly indexed in New York. When we were designing HabibiTech, those are the things that we thought about. And I don't want to jump the gun on the conversation, but we thought about like, how do we make this a New York heavy Muslim tech conference? I've attended other tech conferences. We talked about Muslim Tech Fest. Amazing job they've done. HabibiTech would not be where it is without learning from the examples set by those who came before us. Earlier this year, I attended the Alif Summit. Huge fan. I really admire what they're doing. Beyond just the summit, like as an ecosystem, they're really developing in numerous directions. So we thought, we've been a community for a number of years, but we aren't the first Muslim tech conference. But we can definitely provide something unique to the ecosystem. And alhamdulillah, like New York is known for being a capital of finance. It's known for being a capital of marketing. Think Mad Men, right?
The arts,
Madison
everything.
Avenue. It's a beacon of culture, of creating stories and narratives, the birthplace of hip hop. And New York is arguably, it's probably one of the top 3 diplomatic cities in the world. The UN is in our backyard. So in the political arena, it's also extremely powerful. There's an expression that like when the president of the United States wants to run for office or for re-election, the hedge fund guys don't go to the White House to try to persuade him this way or that way. He goes to their penthouses on Billionaires Row, knocks on doors and asks for money. And that really like implores you to ask, like, where is the power concentrated? Mm-hmm. Is it in DC? Some of it. Is it in Silicon Valley? I'm sure a lot of it is. But New York undeniably has a unique value add by bringing these extremely influential power centers together, the actors, the industry, the money behind these dimensions, and creating a playground where if you understand how to leverage what's in your hand and turn $1 into $2, you could really create an outsized impact for depending on what your goals are. And I think that's like New York in that case can be like shooting fish in a barrel. If you have the acumen, you have the resources, and if you don't have those things, it could be really a very difficult city to navigate through. New York is tough. It forces you to have thick skin. And if you don't have thick skin, it will thicken your skin. But because of that, the people that come out of New York as successful entrepreneurs, organizers, activists, legal minds, I think they're really competitive on a global stage.
I was gonna say, one of the most interesting statistics that you said to me that I was not aware of like until this conversation is 1 out of 8 people in New York are Muslim. I mean, that's 12.5%. Like, that's a lot. Well, it's a lot more than I anticipated in my head. So when I think about that, it's like, wow, everything that is great about New York, right? All the different industry verticals, all the examples you just gave about being in capital markets and, one of the most powerful cities in the world, not just the nation, right? We should be at those tables, right? So that's a very interesting statistic that I think was kind of eye-opening. But let's back up a little bit. In terms of like what really sparked the idea to do HabibiTech, and what was like, so you have this idea and concept of, we're going to do this in New York, but right before that, like what was the aha moment to really be like, we need to get all these great leaders together. We need to have a cultivation and kind of this renaissance of this digital revolution that's going on. What was that moment like for you? How did you reach that conclusion?
HabibiTech has been a community for a number of years, and we've held events in New York, from startup pitches to networking events to educational panels. We've done them independently organized. We've had them held in the homes of large tech companies. And outside of HabibiTech, alhamdulillah, I've had the chance to travel and advise governmental organizations and companies at very high levels. And what I struggled to find was a coherent narrative about how Muslims should lead the way in developing and shaping the behavior of this extremely powerful technology. Now, HabibiTech existed before AI became a buzzword over the last couple of years. And the manner in which it existed was in the spirit of how we founded it. We founded it to help Muslims connect with one another and pull one another up the ladder of technology professionalism. We started to see other organizations, other communities approach that same niche, and we're really happy that it's taking place. And so when you find other folks that are doing similar work to you, and in some cases they're doing it in really unique and admirable ways, you ask, what is not being addressed? And what I didn't see addressed, what our team, our leadership at HabibiTech did not see addressed, was the concept of leadership itself. What does it mean? Like, okay, we got plenty of Muslim developers, plenty of people whose name is Muhammad and Fatima, like coding stuff. You even have a good number of like Muslim founders. Like, we tend to be a very mercantile bunch. But how many, like, are they leaders? Like, if you work at Facebook, you work at Google, and you're making like $500,000 a year, are you a leader? Are you a Muslim leader? I don't know. Like, what does it mean to be a leader? So what if you earn $500,000 a year, and you lead a team of 25 people? Now you're a leader, right? You're not an individual contributor. What if like why are you a leader though? Are you a manager or are you a leader? Is there a distinction? Does it, if your company considers you to be a leader, does that mean that we, the Muslim community, should acknowledge that you're a leader among us? Or are you a leader in your 9 to 5? I think we forget about our opportunities to be leaders within the Muslim community outside of very narrow scopes. Leading a masjid, leading a charitable organization. And there are so many opportunities to demonstrate leadership, but we don't often think about them. We do think about the cliche of being a Muslim doctor, lawyer, engineer. Each of these inherently, they are individualistic roles or individual roles. You're a doctor, yeah, you could run like a medical division or a hospital, but like a doctor is inherently like someone that's treating patients one-on-one. That's like the inherent nature of the role. Engineer, they are designing either our infrastructure or software, but like the inherent nature is that you're an individual contributor. Same thing with an attorney. But then there are other areas of expertise that are intrinsically leadership oriented. And these have been popularized recently by, let's say, Zohran and other folks that have been successful in the public service arena, running for mayor, running for other elected positions. And so those are positions that inspire us because you are leading, right? You're leading a community, you're leading a city, you're leading a district. Nevertheless, it's more than just the fact that you have people that you report to or that report to you. And I think leadership at its core is having a vision for how the world could be or how your domain could be, having people who could align with that vision, not because they're coerced to, but because they believe in your vision, and then mobilizing those people to close the gap between the way the world is today and the way that you want it to be. That's leadership. It can be applied in a really narrow sense to a product that you're building in a big tech company. But I think we demand leadership that is bolder, leadership that challenges what we believe the ummah should look like, and the power structures that affect us, that are imposed upon us, that could empower us, but that often constrict us. The leadership that the ummah needs is leadership that's ultimately going to improve the systems that are currently holding us back. And bringing it back to HabibiTech, I observed, the leadership of HabibiTech observed, that we were having conversations that were far too narrow to suffice our responsibility to be leaders. So we needed to make the conversation more enveloping, and we needed to create dialogue that would inspire and educate our community of what they were capable of.
When you're talking about leadership, right? Growing up, who did you kind of envision as this is a leader? And a follow-up to that question, a leader that you were looking forward to, but then disappointed you.
Okay, so a leader that I looked up to and a leader that I was ultimately disappointed by. The second one's hard. Let's start with the first. I think a lot of people who know me like know this about me. I'm a huge history buff, and one of the personalities that stands out to me, like I've learned so much about his life, and I'm continuously impressed by the details that I learn about it. Salahuddin Ayyubi. Like, yeah, we know, like, in broad strokes, like, he was a just ruler. You know, he protected the Muslim lands during the Crusades. But people underestimate the tactical and strategic brilliance that he exemplified. Like, this guy was a master of supply chain management. You might think, well, how is that relevant to, you know, the Crusades or the needs of Philistine at his time? It was everything. Like, can I give an example? Right?
Of course, absolutely.
Right. So he observed that the Crusaders were not one camp. They had factions among them. بَأْسُهُمْ بَيْنَهُمْ شَدِيدٌ, as Allah says in the Quran, like their animosity among themselves is intense. And many of the Crusaders that had traveled to the Holy Land came from Western Europe, England, France, Germany. But because they weren't from there, they were dependent on Christians that were more locally proximate in order to supply them with the things that they needed to maintain their assault on the Muslim lands. Among them, they relied heavily on Italian steel. So, but you might wonder, what about all the Italian Crusaders? There weren't that many. Most of the Crusaders were from like more Western Europe, and Italy was not really among the leaders sending knights out to Palestine. So what Salahuddin observed was the Italians were supporting the Crusaders, but not because they cared. They were doing it because they wanted money. They wanted to just profit off of the campaigns against the Muslims, and the Crusaders were well-resourced, and they would purchase Italian steel. So Salahuddin said, look, you know, like, we could use the high-quality Italian steel as well. Why don't we make a deal with them? And that's exactly what he did. He made like what you might call an exclusive trade deal, where like virtually 100% of Italian steel was now exported to Egypt, and none of it went to the Crusaders. So now Egypt, just by paying the right price, had a world of high quality steel to use for manufacturing, to use for building infrastructure, building factories, building whatever is needed. And now the Crusaders that were relying on this raw material don't have it anymore. That's something that can sway the tide of a conflict like the Crusades. And it wasn't just like, oh, we need to stand up. Yeah, stand up how, bro? There's strategy behind it. Think a couple of dimensions beyond what's immediately in front of you. And I think he did that in masterful ways. He did it on the supply chain level. He did it on the societal, organizational level. And he challenged expectations and assumptions that were unquestioned by a lot of people around him. And that's leadership. You have a vision that is controversial while you're executing it. It's controversial. People might call you crazy or weird until it's a success. And then we take it for granted for 900 years. Like, wow, like we can't even have leadership unless we invoke a new Salahuddin of our era. It becomes your new, you know, paradigm. There's expression like Salahuddin is like a popular name in Palestine, right? For a reason. I forget exactly how the saying goes, but like نحن أبناء فلسطين وكلنا صلاح الدين. We are the sons of Palestine, and all of us are Salahuddin. And he wasn't even Palestinian; he was Kurdish. Mm-hmm. But what does that tell you? Like, he had a vision whose impact continued to inspire people for nearly 1,000 years. So it's hard not to know about his life and withhold from being inspired by him. In terms of a leader that let me down,
I have to say, though, that was a great pick. Like, that was an inspiring story, right?
I appreciate it. I would really recommend to anyone that's part of our conversation at the table or outside of it to read upon his life. Like, really, like, dive into it. Go beyond the really simplistic stories. Like, yeah, like the simplistic versions, the Hollywood depictions, they're pretty good. And like, it speaks volumes that even his enemies, hundreds of years later, speak highly of this man.
Well, I think what something people overlook with him is the level of political, I want to say savagery, because he was brilliant, right, in terms of working with the Ismaili government at that time. And because at this point, I believe Iraq, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but Iraq and Iran, those territories, they were very separate from the entity of what Egypt was going through, because there were two different sects of Islam at that point. And even though Salahuddin himself aligned more with, I guess the area of Iraq, modern day Iraq and Iran, like Sunni sect, he was still able to work with and navigate those political leadership and thought processes while still honoring his own self, and then eventually leading to a sense of unification that existed for both realms.
Yeah.
Right?
Is that a question?
I don't know. I mean, that's like loosely what I understood, but I haven't gone like super depth onto him. But
we can make this a podcast about Salahuddin. I'm going to try not to do that, but also drop a couple of bits that might be informative. So Salahuddin became the most powerful leader in the Middle East. But because he honored the institutions of Islam, he didn't aspire to be the grand leader of the region. And so he always maintained his loyalty to the Khalifa of the time, who was the Khalifa of Baghdad, the Abbasid leader. But he could have assumed that power himself, taken it over, but he never felt the need and he never wanted to. He's like, look, I'm a governor under the umbrella that already exists, and I'm going to do the best that I can without exceeding what I need to do. Now, one of the things that is very controversial about Salahuddin's life was that he really was not afraid of conflict, not just with Crusaders, but it's no secret that he did clash with the Shia leadership in Egypt. First, there was a peace agreement between Salahuddin that was part of the Sunni establishment under the Sunni Khilafah that was rooted in Baghdad, but that encompassed parts of Syria as well. And under the leadership of Nuruddin Zinki, his mentor, that was rooted in Syria, they made an agreement that Salahuddin would come in as a fortifier to support the Shia. And these aren't, even the Shia that are prominent today. These were a particular group of Shia that have unusual beliefs, compared to the majority of 12 Shia that we find in like Lebanon and Syria and so forth. But these were Shia that were ruling in Egypt. They invited Salahuddin to support against the Crusaders that had ambitions of conquering parts of Egypt. And eventually Salahuddin saw an opening, and he transitioned Egypt into being a Sunni majority country or region or governance. And it's very controversial. A lot of people might disagree with him for taking on his allies who were Muslim at the time. Others would say, hey, like, this was a strategic choice he needed to make. But it wasn't just the Shia that he went to war with or that he opposed. His own mentor, Nuruddin, that was based in Syria, who sent him and raised him and so forth, they almost went to war. Wow. Like, it was Sunni against Shia, and then it was Sunni against Sunni. None of this was new, by the way. This whole region was like, it was the Balkans of the era. They were constantly at war with each other. But what Salahuddin felt was true, and which panned out to be a successful bet, whether it's prescriptive for our times or not, it may not be. But what he decided was, we're never going to beat the Crusaders until we're unified among ourselves. And if the only way to unify among ourselves is to force us to be unified, we're going to do what we got to do.
Yeah.
Again, and I think I want to caution ourselves from assuming that because a strategy worked at a certain time, that it's the only strategy that's going to work. Like, there was a point where there was no previous Salahuddin looked up to other people, but I'm sure he didn't copy their toolkit play for play. He learned the best that he could. He abstracted lessons from various eras. He used his best judgment, and he did what he thought was best. He's not a prophet, but at the same time, he demonstrated qualities of leadership by having a vision for what needed to be done and closing the gap between the world that he lived in and the world that he wanted to see. And whether we're looking at someone like him and taking him as an example or not, we need to look at strategically what is realistic for our time also, without compromising on that ambition and that boldness of vision. So sometimes one value that could be true is that you might find people that are truly allies with you in one domain, and they might be good friends of yours, but you have to be willing to embrace disagreement if you want to get the results that are meaningful to you. And if you're trying to always move with consensus, it may not always work. And I think leadership expects, in fact, I would say it demands, that you have to navigate disagreement elegantly. Different circumstances, different environments, different groups of people that you engage with will chart different paths for what an effective management of disagreement looks like. But overwhelmingly, you need to know that people are not always going to agree with you, especially if you have a vision that is going to stir some pots and is going to change things from the status quo. The people that you might be wanting to help, they may be the first people who will present challenges in your way, and you have to accept that.
That's wonderfully put. Speaking of stirring pots, I'm not going to let you avoid the question. A leader who stirred your pot.
Pause. That sounds different. We're in New York. We don't talk like that. A leader that disappointed me, though, I don't know, man. I think, look, growing up, this is maybe like a much, an older perspective. We talked about a childhood hero. I'll tell you about maybe a theme of childhood disappointment. I think growing up, like, I was hopeful that the adults in our lives had answers. And I think leadership does not need to be like a historical person. Like, it could be someone that's close to you. I think we often assume that the people around us have, especially as children, as young adults, we think that like someone out there has the answers. And either they're just too lazy to make the right decision, they're not courageous enough to make the right call, or some variation of that. And I think rather than pinning blame on one person and saying this person's at fault, I think I came to a realization that no one really knows how things ought to be or what the world should look like. And I think it's an interesting philosophical conundrum when we're talking about leadership, because we're talking about like painting a vision for how the world ought to be, but at the same time I'm saying no one knows how the world ought to be. No one really knows what should be done in like an objective sense. There are no like objectively right answers, but there are leaders, and that invites the question, what is leadership when there are no correct answers? I think it's a beautiful two-sided coin, because on one hand, even people that don't believe in destiny, people that are not Muslim, they have perspectives on what's right, and they will work towards those perspectives, and they will look back and say the right course of action was the one that won, right? Very Hobbesian, very like Leviathan perspective. Right or might makes right. And
peace through strength.
The modern way to say it.
Yeah.
And I think in our worldview, we acknowledge that, there's an not an ayah, but there's a saying in Arabic. I don't even believe it's a hadith, but there's a saying in Arabic, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَزْعُ بِالسُّلْطَانِ مَا لَا يَزْعُ بِالْقُرْآنِ. It's often considered a hadith, but it's not an authentic hadith. But the meaning of it is sound. It's a good expression. And it means sometimes Allah executes His will through power and through force in ways that He does not do through the Quran alone, through offering guidance. Sometimes the world changes because people decide that it's going to change in one direction or another. And so if there are no like objective right answers, there are certainly answers that are better than others. And if this person is trying to take the world in a direction that we don't agree with, because we have values, we have principles, we have interests in people that we care for, then it's our responsibility, despite being imperfect, despite inevitably making mistakes along the way and only having a part of the picture but not all of it, it's our responsibility to move things in a direction that is compatible with our values and in a way that reflects the world that we want to see. We're going to make mistakes along the way, as leaders and certainly as followers. But it's imperative upon us to strive to bring about the change that enacts the world that we aspire for as Muslims. You claim to want justice, but the world is unjust. So then try to make it just. Exercise your will, exercise your effort towards changing the systems, the institutions, the individual folks that are in positions of power, to bring about a just world that is meaningful to you. that aligns with your spirit, right? That's leadership. Those are demonstrations of leadership. Even when we don't know everything that needs to be done and we might make mistakes, even given our best efforts, we still need to make those efforts, even if we're incomplete along the way. Because even if we're imperfect, there are definitely people that are highly motivated and highly competent at bringing things in a far worse direction than they already are. Someone needs to stand up to that. And that's what Allah put us on this earth for.
I mean, we are caliphs, right, for this planet, and for everyone who is here and seeing what parts we have. I think it's an important part that you kind of mentioned is being able to do what you have control over, right, and stepping up to that leadership role. Now, you obviously have a lot of experience in terms of getting involved very early in your career. And one thing I'm kind of curious to learn more about is your experience of working with the UN and these projects that you've done. What kind of propels you to go that direction of leadership? Because I think a lot of people who identify as Muslim or as Americans who are younger, they feel like those like accolades or those positions are so far from attaining for people like us to have a voice. What helped you kind of get yourself into those rooms and positions? Because, I mean, those are impressive achievements. And what in that process did you really learn that was, okay, I can really make an impact in this role?
Alhamdulillah, I had the chance to be in some incredibly educational environments. In school, grad school, many of the jobs that I've had, I've been privileged to learn from people that were excellent at what they do. And the cliche that's often passed around is like your net worth is your network or whatever, right? When we're talking about creating change, there is a huge importance on the people that you can tap into who can help you to unlock opportunity. Whether that opportunity is by knowing the direction to go and to exercise your efforts, or whether that opportunity is knowledge of the landscape and what threats might cause you to stumble along the way so that you can avoid them, or what opportunities might be hidden behind closed doors and the only way to access them is by proverbially saying the password. It's by being in the right room at the right place at the right time. You know, there's a lot of value in that. When I was an undergrad, I was a debater. I was on the Stony Brook debate team, and I thought it was fun, right? Like it was like a
CX
Lincoln Douglas. I thought that's the same thing.
I did American parliamentary debate.
Oh, okay.
What is that? How is what is? Can you give a little?
Yeah, so American parliamentary debate was structured where you had two teams, government and opposition. Government would present a case that they worked on ahead of time. They thought through it in all of its nuances, and they would present typically like 3 or 4 original arguments for why they believed they were right. So they had time to prepare. And then the opposition team, they were learning about whatever subject it was the day of. And while they are hearing this 7-minute speech by the first speaker from the government side, the opposition side is understanding exactly what argument they're making and simultaneously not just rebutting it, but simultaneously coming up with 3 or 4 counterpoints that are completely logically independent for why this is a terrible idea and we should do the opposite or do something different. And so it forces you to think really rapidly on your feet. I think it's an amazing skill.
Yeah, 100%.
It's super, super useful.
It sounds very similar to CX, cross-examination, which I actually did that for 4 years as well in high school.
I did Lincoln Douglas.
That explains it. MashaAllah. No, but it sounds very, very similar, but it sounds like the affirmative has a little bit more time to prepare on their case than CX. But these skill sets are, like, I use them till this day. The ability to think, speak really fast and interpret thought, like interpret someone else's conversation really quickly. And then, I don't know if this was the case for the type of debate that you did, but if you dropped an argument, you lose.
Yeah. It could be the worst argument.
Silence is you could literally say, it's going to rain apples. But if you don't refute that argument,
we have to assume
we have to assume that that's true in the next round. So it's like you learn these skills, and I think they're like so productive to increase the brain muscles, right? As you get into like some of these more professions that, you know, you can leverage like the thought processes behind them.
100%. And I think debate was one of the most fulfilling experiences I've had for all the reasons that you described, and a few more than I can add as well. As a tech person, I think it is so true that like tech people are nerds. Like let's stop pretending that it's not
Why
true.
is that a bad thing?
Let's stop pretending that it's not true.
Yeah,
Let's stop saying. But like, if the tech industry as a collective has, let's say, like a bias towards certain strengths at the expense of other strengths, what that means is you as a person swimming up that stream or in that direction, you as a person have very clear and obvious ways to stand out. When I was getting into tech myself, I already had an undergrad in psychology and linguistics, and then I had a master's in international relations. And I'm like, at 26 years old, I'm like, I want to learn how to code. And like a bunch of folks in my life, they were like, why would you do that? Like, just, you know, you have these strengths. You've already worked at the UN. You have the ability to build a strong career with what you've already studied and invested into by this point. If you want to build something, just hire some dude from MIT and they'll build it better than you can. And maybe they're right. Maybe that's true. But like, if I can grasp, 80-20, as they say, right? Like the majority of the skills that you need to be proficient in that domain, but I'm like top 1% within that industry at a skill that everyone else suffers at, but which could propel me to do well in that career, then that would be my superpower. So if everyone else, let's say like I'm like average as a developer, I like to think I'm better than average, but let's say like I'm an average software engineer, machine learning engineer, but I'm like the top 1% when it comes to communicating where our project is, what the business expects of us, analyzing the business landscape and the market opportunities, and then really speaking to the people that are in front of me, earning their trust, demonstrating character, demonstrating an empathy for what they're thinking through on a personal level, and using that to build the trust that will lead to the success of my team, then that is a way to stand out from most of the other developers that are just thinking about how good the code is. And at the end of the day, every job is a people job. Every job, you're reporting to someone. So when you can empathize with the people that you're working with, then you're going to probably end up developing a superpower, especially in tech, when many folks don't focus on that. They focus on the code. They think that they're lone wolves and they're going to succeed. This is an aside, but there's a lot of talk that like now we're in the age where you can build a one-person unicorn, a one-person billion-dollar company. The people are talking about a one-person trillion-dollar company. Who knows? Maybe it's true. But I think when these tools are so democratized now, that now my skill set as an AI engineer is not necessarily as unique as it once was. It's not so inaccessible as it once was, when you can chat GPT all the things that I know, and you could figure it out in much less time than it took me to acquire those skills. So then what is the moat around the skill set? The moat is your ability to synthesize disparate skills and to ask questions that up until now have been really siloed in different domains. So if you can ask the best technical questions so that you can learn the technical knowledge that you need rapidly and thoroughly and apply it, but you can also ask the best human-facing questions, the best leadership and organizational questions, and internalize the themes that are important in that area, and you can understand the best questions or ask the best questions about the market landscape, the opportunities, the competition. These are multiple domains that only intersect a little bit, and entire careers are built in silos separating these areas of expertise. So if you can integrate them together, and you have a team that integrates those skills together effectively, that team is going to be unstoppable, because the percentage of people that integrate those skills on an individual basis is low. There's a lot of people that are very good at being people facing experts. There are a lot of people who are excellent on a technical level, and like they're not great at the other things. They're average or below average. But when you combine all of them, that person is extremely, extremely competent. They're dangerous in the workforce, on a team, as a founder. But like then you have the multiplicative effects, where if you have two of those people and they get along and they can work together and they're working on the same goal and they trust each other, you have like two Michael Jordans on the same team and they don't clash. Yeah. That's how you build like extremely, extremely competent teams. That's a team that I would want to be a part of.
Absolutely. I mean, I think of these people that you described as high agency people, and I forgot Naval. I think it was Naval who said this, but he basically says that a startup, particularly, is an infinite set of problems. You just have problems coming at you all day long. And so if you're trying to build a team and a structure around a team, you want to have these high agency folks that just know how to handle and take care of issues that arise, so that the number of things that you deal with is significantly less.
Yeah.
Because you're trying to grow the pipe for everyone, right? So if you're in a leadership structure. And so the need for having someone who can understand your position on behalf of you and act independently, it's going to increase the overall operational skill sets of the team. The higher market cap, more time for partnerships, relationships, and deals. So if you have 5 of these people that are like super like high agency folks, then you can give each of them 20% of your time, right? But if each of them, if only take 10%, then you can get 10. And that means you can have wider a range of things that you can kind of attack and try to have an operational team. But what you've described is so hard to find someone who's deeply technical, has actually dealt with code and deployed it, has the ability to synthesize and understand it from a business model standpoint, and then being able to go communicate that. There are a lot of people out there, by the way, that do this well, but it's like a percentage of a percentage.
Yeah.
So, if you were advising someone who's going to actually build a startup and they're looking for these people, right? Where do you go? What do they do? How do they find these people? What's your thoughts?
HabibiTech Summit, Brooklyn, August 30th, 2025.
You like that, Tia?
I really like that you asked that question. Obviously, like we're building HabibiTech as a community and as a platform to help Muslim founders and Muslim leaders find one another, right? To find your tribe. But one thing that I would really advise Muslims who aspire for the highest level of agency to consider is that there is a really underpriced asset out there. And that underpriced asset is the opportunity to travel and to search for pockets of highly concentrated Muslim leaders that are on the same wavelength as you. And HabibiTech is one of a number of these environments that are worth considering. Like this past year, partly because I wanted to and I wanted to learn from others, but also partly to see how we can improve what HabibiTech is offering relative to other folks that have thought through these challenges before us. I traveled to a variety of Muslim tech and professional and leadership conferences all around the world, from SF to London to Malaysia. I think what stood out to me was if you find people that care about what you care about, they're extremely competent, they're trustworthy, and their character is reliable, do whatever you can. Do whatever you can to work with them. Like, figure it out. Because those are the people, inshallah, that will have your back when they don't even need to, when they don't expect anything from you. And the other thing I would also suggest is that when you find people that are excellent at what they do, like one of the traditions of the Prophet ﷺ was that he was a tradesman, right? He worked for Khadija. He was a businessman. But he was easygoing when it came to negotiations. And I think one of the things that it's benefited me is that when you're doing business with someone, yes, you always want to get a good deal. And, you know, you guys are from South Asia, I'm from Egypt. Like, our countries are, like, known for haggling, like, not a secret. But, like, the real value is when you let the other person who's offering you something feel like they got the better end of the deal. Because then they're going to want to do it again. They're going to want to work with you time and time again. They're going to want to continue to, hopefully, like, if they're a person of integrity, improve the quality that they're offering you, because compared to everyone else that's on the marketplace, it's so easy for you to stand out, because everyone else is trying to undercut them, trying to waste their time, trying to stretch them thin. So when you have someone that honors them, values the quality of their work, like, if it was you, wouldn't you want to work with someone who sees you in that way? I would.
I mean, I think it goes to a very famous hadith. I forget the proper structure, but the general idea was that the ummah can only improve when you want the best for your brother more than you want it for your own self, right? Like, are you going out of your way to making sure that they are getting something that is fair and something that is just? And ultimately, so much of Islam is that, right? Being just to everyone, not just fellow Muslims, but also people in your community who oftentimes are going to be non-Muslims, especially if you're living in America, right? Like, even with the Sahaba, like, a lot of the Christians that were local to Medina, or even a lot of the Jews who lived locally, they would go to Prophet Muhammad ﷺ to handle a lot of their grievances or infighting that may have been happening, right? And I think that's something that we need to kind of recenter and aspire to again, is how can I really give the best to my fellow brother or to my fellow sister of faith? Now, you've obviously had a lot of overlapping between leadership and technology and all these things, and especially with AI being such a focus point for HabibiTech, there is a lot of opinions on AI, whether that be beneficial or, you know, dangerous, whatever it may be. And one of the things I'm kind of curious on knowing is that working both in diplomacy and in AI, you kind of understand the intersection of hype and fear and how they can shape decisions. And I think AI is a really good example of those things. What is an example for you of when, for example, how perception was more powerful than facts? And how do you navigate that?
Let's keep it as close to AI as we can for the time being.
Yeah.
Within the process of organizing HabibiTech Summit, we've met Muslims and non-Muslims that have views all over the place. And some of them are valid views, but they're misled in terms of the conclusions that they draw because of their views. So I think connecting this back to leadership takes in the full picture and then identifies within that picture what is the lever that I need to focus on in order to change the system so that we have a different picture, right? You're not going to change everything. Like, you have a 20 megabyte pixel, you're not going to change every pixel, but you might change part of it that's going to have systemic effects. So as an example, like, by the way, like, I did my master's thesis on the environmental impacts of, like, transnational water conflicts. In other words, like, how countries that share a limited single body of water are able to negotiate with one another so that everyone has an equitable outcome and it doesn't lead to war. I focused on the Great Renaissance Dam that was being built in Ethiopia, which has downstream limitations on the water that Sudan and Egypt are going to receive. Limitations that, frankly, bring these countries to the brink of war. So like, it's very near and dear to me to understand, like, the climate impacts of the decisions that our leadership takes. So when we talk about the climate impacts that AI has, valid, right? AI uses a huge amount of energy, and sometimes it's laughable the things that we exert that energy to produce. Give me a meme about this, give me a joke about that, and meanwhile, like, you know, maybe 20 bottles of water were utilized for you to just, you know, have like an unimportant conversation with someone who doesn't exist. So it's valid. At the same time, a leader doesn't take a drastic and myopic opinion based on one detail. You don't say, oh, let's not focus on, let's steer away from AI because it's bad for the environment. Really, you just reduced the most consequential technology of our generation, perhaps of the next several hundred years, certainly of the last several hundred years, to one issue. It's not saying that issue isn't important, but there are a lot of things to consider. And so, even when we're putting together something like HabibiTech Summit, I don't think the summit's for everybody. I think the summit's for leadership. Because imagine you come into a room and you're expecting to converse with folks that have thought about things holistically. They're not perfect. They have their weak spots. They're here to learn from other folks as well. But they want to have a rich and thorough conversation that includes nuances. It includes trade-offs. It includes an honest assessment about strategically the things we should focus on, the things that we should keep in mind. But we don't want to reduce very complex issues to one thing and one thing only. So this is just an example, right? Like, yes, AI has negative climate-oriented impacts. But do we say, hey, we're not going to touch AI because it's bad for the environment? Extremely myopic, extremely limited. We're going to face opposition.
You always have critics.
You're always going to have critics, right? And you have to expect
and you have to
that.
be able to know how to filter what is, because you have to still take the points, but you have to be able to put it in context of the source, the bias that's associated with it, and then be able to assess, like, hey, is there some validity to this? Yes, no. Do they have the full picture? Yes, no. And then how am I going to react to it?
You need to have the strength and the courage to act, but also to have the humbleness to take feedback.
Great,
of course.
Great way to summarize.
Now, one of the things that I think you mentioned is really important. One thing, because this, I think, just some background, like I'm a technical AI product manager at Toyota, right? So one of the things that I'm trying to understand more, and love your thoughts on this, is that there's a lot of people who are so scared of AI that they don't want to even get involved or use it or learn it, right? And I can understand that. I come from Texas, right, where gun rights and gun conversation is always a developing thing, right?
Not in Texas.
Yeah, but in the same lens, right, some of these tools, right, at the end of the day, how do you kind of lead certain dialogues where, like, okay, I understand that you're scared of this tool, that, let's say AI in this case, but ignoring or not using it does not mean that the entire world will stop using it.
Exactly, yeah.
And this kind of takes me back to what you were saying about leadership, right? And I'm being very simplistic language for the sake of conversation here, but there's evil leaders and there's good leaders. If the good says, I don't want to participate because of these niche evil things within this tool and ignoring all the good things this tool can also do, unfortunately, the evil people are still going to keep sailing. And at least that's the way I perceive it, right? It is two tides working against each other. If one stops, the other one will overwhelm itself.
Sure.
How do you lead that dialogue? At least going to HabibiTech, because I'm sure a lot of these concerns will be brought up, but what mindsets can we take from HabibiTech, or that you may have able to share, to encourage people, hey, your stances on these things are valid, but this is how we can also combat against those negative drawbacks?
Yeah, excellent question. First of all, understand your target audience and understand that not everyone needs to be your target audience. Not everyone is our intended audience at HabibiTech. Like, if you are afraid to use a computer, you're not our target audience. If you are, like, hiding your head in the sand because it's bad for the environment, like, you're not our intended audience. Our intended audience include folks that are more thoughtful about the big picture, and they already demonstrate strategic perspectives in other areas, even if it's not AI, even if it's not tech, but they understand that everything comes with trade-offs. And one of the ways that we are keen on communicating our thesis, our message that Muslims need to be leaders in AI is by rooting it back in, like, real lived historical examples. Once upon a time, Muslims had the opportunity to make a decision on how we would respond to the knowledge transformation technology of the era, paper. And I don't know if you guys know the story of paper, but it's actually a fascinating story. When Muslims were expanding our dominion, and we were engaged in a battle in what is today Uzbekistan. We encountered the Chinese artisans that were making paper at that time, and they had invented the modern process of paper making. At the time, Muslims and Arabs and folks that came from those lands, they were using parchment as their primary means of writing things down and recording things. Parchment and papyrus, right? Shout out to the Egyptians. Now you might be like, all right, paper, parchment, is there really a big difference? Huge difference, right? Paper is literally grows on trees, so it's cheap, it's abundant, it's affordable, and you can write on both sides. Parchment is like the dried skin of dead animals, so it's limited by your supply of dead animals. It is expensive to make because you have to dry out the skins. You can only write on one side of it, not both. So it's like extremely, extremely limited. And so if the tool that you're going to write on, parchment, is limited and it's expensive and you can't really get a hold of it, is it really worth investing into literacy if you're not going to be able to exercise that literacy functionally? Not as much, right? So the bottleneck of knowledge during that time for that region was the technology of recording knowledge. And writing on like bones and rocks and parchment it limited our ability and willingness to invest into learning how to read. And paper was a revolution for its time for that reason. Now, we like the Abbasi Khalifa of the time, Harun al-Rashid, one of the most famous leaders in Muslim history. He acknowledged it. He's like, this is going to change everything. We need to, like, if he was a VC, like, Hall of Fame VC for identifying what is worth investing into. So as the Abbasi Khalifa of the time, he said, look, we're going to throw a ton of money at this venture, this paper thing. He led the charge, had Muslims learn the craft of making paper from the Chinese, who came from the Tang dynasty. Muslims learned how to make paper extremely well. We became global leaders of the paper manufacturing industry. And then this unlocked opportunities over the next couple of generations for Muslims to be leaders of knowledge itself. Now, paper was abundant, so it became very easy to jot down ideas. When it's easy to jot down ideas, it's easy to preserve knowledge and to duplicate it and replicate it and make it available globally. Now, there's a market for knowledge. Now you can buy and sell these artifacts, these books, these articles, and so forth. When there's a market, it economically incentivizes people to contribute more to what we could call the knowledge economy. And now knowledge became an engine of economic growth. Now it became also an enabler of all of the things that benefit from knowledge, from the sciences to economics, to trade, to business, to politics, to military, to arts and creativity. Knowledge became available as a tool as a raw material to support every facet of the Muslim society. So it became such a success, this venture into the knowledge asset class, that the Khulafa, right, the Muslim leadership of the Abbasi era, they would pay Muslims or whoever, they would pay scribes to translate from ancient Greek and Latin the works of the Europeans, Plato and Aristotle and Socrates, and translate that into Arabic, which was the prominent language of the time, in order to preserve the ancient knowledge that many of us take for granted today. And you might think, well, all right, well, how much did they pay them? They paid them a lot. They would pay them the equivalent of a book's weight in gold. So if you translated one of Plato's works and it was this thick, right, let's say a couple pounds, a kilo, you would get that much of gold. Imagine like a pound of gold, how much it's worth. It's crazy. Like that's how much they would pay. Now you might think, oh, well, this would lead to corruption. That's ridiculous, because then you could just write in really large letters, use really thick paper. You know what they did? And knowledge was valued so much that they still paid them the weight of the book in gold. No matter how big you wrote, how many cross-outs, the knowledge was worth it. That was the attitude that we had. Fast forward a few hundred years. The Germans invent the printing press. The first major book that was popularized and mass-produced was the Gutenberg Bible. You can see it at Harvard. At least one copy is still preserved on display in the museum. Now, during the Uthmani Khilafah, this was like in the 1400s, about 700 years after the advent of paper, during the Uthmani era, we had a very different attitude. We didn't say, oh, let's double down on this investment. Let's, acquire this company, the Gutenberg industry. What we did instead was we said, well, actually, what really happened was there was an overall aversion to innovation. Like there was an overall aversion to it. This was past the golden age. We had,
within the Muslim Ummah.
This is where this is what we would call the Ottoman Empire.
Okay.
And the head of Muslim leadership was based in modern day Turkey. For what it's worth, during that time, the official language was maybe Turkish, right? But it was written in Arabic script. And I mention this because one of the special interest groups of the time, right, was it was called the Guild of Scribes. And they petitioned the Khilafah, the leadership, not to allow the proliferation of the printing press because it would take their jobs away. Very uber conservative, overly protectionist economic policy. So it would take the jobs away of the scribes, and they were like the equivalent of like the NRA or other special interest groups in the United States, where if they lobby on behalf of an industry, it has an outsized impact in shaping policy. And for other reasons that just reflected our aversion to innovation, our conservatism, that became the law of the land. At least in a limited capacity, but a meaningful limited capacity. So the law was you're not allowed to use the printing press to mass produce Arabic text. Why? Because Arabic, in their perception, was sacred. It's the language of the Quran. And any mistake in this beautiful, holy language, we couldn't accept that if there was a mistake in the master copy, it would be mass duplicated to thousands of copies that are distributed elsewhere. So in the interest of keeping things safe, let's not use the printing press, at least in Arabic, which by default meant like almost everything because that was the language of the land, the written language. So Europe was on the up and up. They learned a lot from us, ironically, during the era of the Crusades, during the time of Salahuddin. They came to the Muslim world, they're like, whoa, you guys are doing some cool stuff. They took a lot of that back to Europe with them, and it eventually, literally 200 years after the Crusades, printing press. Like, it was not that much time, but they took it back with them. Printing press was invented in Germany. Gutenberg, right, super German name. That explosion of knowledge led the Renaissance to kind of really kick off in like an aggressive fashion. And the Renaissance spread continentally across Europe, and it became a continental sensation. Now everyone was mass producing literature. They had so much literature that now knowledge was not a limited raw material anymore. Now they had so much literature that they didn't have to take for granted if they read something that it was true. Now they could debate, is my knowledge better than your knowledge? And that's where the Enlightenment began, right? You had the Renaissance that led to this explosion of thought and proliferation of knowledge. Then the Enlightenment was Europe's attempt at refining and consolidating and synthesizing all of these ideas that had been amassed through their own traditions, borrowed from other cultures and civilizations, and synthesizing in a way that resonated with the prominent values and the powerful values of that time. And that's where you had the ideas that eventually became the cornerstone ideas of the Western tradition. And they had so much thought that they had to select what are we going to prioritize and what's going to become our values. And that's where we are today. At the same time, Muslims are hesitant. The Ottoman Empire became known as the sick man of Europe, and it economically continued declining until eventually the Ottoman Empire ceased to become a political entity by World War I. And then all these Muslim countries were divided, and the British gave Palestine to the occupiers, and the Muslims now are like several dozen small countries, and every few years you have one being torn off and split in two and things of that sort. But there's a history behind it. And so when we're bringing it back to your question about how can we engage with people that over-index on one problem or one fault or one limitation that a technology presents, we can't afford to be myopic. We have to think about the big picture. We can't afford to be the scribes who are going to have job insecurity momentarily until... We can't over-index on one issue at the expense of every issue. And when you have a technology that is a knowledge-based asset, and that's what's common. It's not just like that's what's different about the printing press or paper compared to something like the astrolabe. discovery technology, navigating, in marine environments or during the nighttime. Or something like gunpowder, powerful military technology, allows you to conquer your enemies. These are knowledge-based technologies, which means they are the cornerstone of every industry. There's no industry that isn't like completely dependent on the knowledge that goes into it as a raw material. So when you're able to multiply the effectiveness of all of these industries simultaneously because you have this one tool that serves as the flame beneath it, then everything is going to, hopefully, it'll be the tide that raises all boats. Even if, some of them get a rocky uplift along the way. And so leadership, on one hand, is not being myopic and over-indexing on one issue, even if it's a really important issue. And who knows, like, by being systematic and thorough, you might observe that this one issue at a certain time and a certain moment is so important that it overshadows numerous smaller issues. It may be the case, but you only know that by weighing it and giving it your best estimation. Hiding your head in the sand is not going to do it. So on one hand, it's important not to be myopic. And on the other hand, it's important to know, like we said, who your audience is. At HabibiTech, we're focused on expanding the technology conversation from technologists and bringing it into the spaces of leaders from a variety of industries. I think when I've attended other Muslim tech conferences, as an example, I've seen excellent work being done at developing narratives that motivate Muslims to be excellent in the tech industry, to start companies, to invest, to start funds. But bringing it back to New York, right, and what makes New York a special place, New York has a ton of tech, but you'll find software engineers that work in finance companies. You'll have AI engineers that work in media companies. You'll have data scientists that work in healthcare groups. Like, are they healthcare workers? Are they tech workers? They don't work for Facebook or Google. Some of them might, but like, what industry is home for them? And I think it doesn't matter. Like that label doesn't matter. Like, what industry, it doesn't matter. What matters is in the New York context, what's your skill set? And so here we look at tech as an enabler, right? That technology that is the tide that raises many boats. It is an enabler for many of these industries. And that's the connective tissue between leaders in all these spaces. And that's why HabibiTech, as a platform, we're developing it as a leadership platform that focuses on the knowledge technology of our generation, AI, rather than the tech industry as a silo.
That's very interesting. I mean, I resonate with a lot of the things that you've said in terms of like looking at AI as being such a revolutionary technology stack. It resonates well with me because you basically say, hey, this is a way to process knowledge and come up with different analysis and skill sets, right? That the output can be better formed. And I never really thought about that comparison to like paper and, the printing press or, even material innovations. I never like put that, I related the closest to just internet, but even the internet, if you really think about it, is a knowledge-based network, right? So I like the way you framed it. And I think most of our audience is going to say the same thing. Like this is for sure a very innovative technology stack. It's changing the way we build a business from ground up. It's challenging original business models, what we think of conventionally true today. We now have to go back to the drawing board and retest some of those assumptions, right? A good example of this is like a year and a half ago, people thought Google was going to go out of business, which is still could. But like up until that point, like that was a ludicrous idea to think about, like search for Google. And now you have people who are fundamentally shifting like the way that you search. It's actually now ChatGPT and other Replets and other type Perplexities and all these other type platforms. So, the shift is happening. And I think it is important to be at the table for some of those conversations. In terms of like the general landscape of artificial intelligence, it's been around for a long time. People don't maybe know that as much, but there's early papers in research that have been around for 60, 70 years, right? Like the military and government organizations have been looking at this for a very long time. Now, like any type of technology stack, you have to have the right pieces to support it, Like if I use the analogy of a car, like you can have an amazing engine, but if you don't have the alternator and you don't have the belt at the time when belts were made, like if you don't have these pieces, that you don't have a proper wheel that can handle the load, if you don't have the other technology innovation stack to combine and work together, you can't like build a workable car that's going to get you from A to B. So I guess it took 40, 50 years to kind of reach some of those inflection points where, hey, we're now at a time when the research is now turning into more applications. And I would probably say the last 5 to 10 years, right? Do you agree with that assessment? Or do you think like, where are we in terms of like the AI landscape today? Like is it all about commercialization? Is it all about just like LLMs is the way to go? Like what's your thought process about the general landscape? And then I have some follow-up questions related to that.
I think you're right that it's been around for a long time. Like the papers that design or that explain the design of modern neural networks, the foundations of deep learning, they were like written in the 70s. But you couldn't really act on them because neural networks, despite mathematically, theoretically being sound and having been conceptualized a long time ago, in order to put them into practice, you need a ton of data. So it's expected that people think and they contrive ideas before they can really fully execute them. And we didn't have a lot of stored data in the 70s. Data storage was extremely expensive. Like you ever see those photos of like people like a team of strong men pushing a calculator up a ramp or something or bring it into a room. And now, you have a supercomputer on your phone. So at that time, we had the mathematical foundations of neural networks and a lot of deep learning, but we didn't have the data or the compute power to really execute it, except in very rare cases like the IBM supercomputers and these historical stories. In the early 2000s, we had several like breakthroughs of massive orders of magnitude that supported the advent of AI in stages. First, like storage became really, really cheap. So storing data became a responsibility that every business took seriously. And that's where we had that buzzword, big data, big data, big data, cloud, big data, big. But it became like taken for granted. Okay, now we're going to like stop doing the hard drive thing and we're going to store, like you don't need like server rooms in your company anymore. Now you can store it in these big data warehouses. And that's where AWS and GCP and so forth became prominent. And then compute caught up. Right? Compute became really inexpensive, and now you could use compute to double down on the speed with which you generated data. You're able to process more transactions, have applications that do more faster, and the more that you're doing and the faster you're doing it, the more data that's generated. The more data that you're generated, the more that you're able to build applications on that data, right, as a derivative that you're able to create new economic value from. And that's where the tech industry largely, like from like a raw material standpoint, found its explosion of value. So how many like data companies blew up in the last like 2 decades? More than we can count, right? Like more than you had the data warehouse companies that just told you, hey, just give it to us, we'll store it like a bank. You have the data analytics companies like, okay, now you have so much data, how are you going to find what you need? We'll help you, right? You have really specific applications. So finding data within, for companies of a certain industry, but doing so in a way like, or organizing your data in a way that focuses on your need, your application. Think Salesforce. We need a CRM to organize all these interactions with customers. We're going to supply you with a really elegant system that will organize your data for marketing-based purposes. Again, but Salesforce wouldn't exist without big data companies like AWS. Whether or not they're built on AWS in particular, irrelevant. But like all these tools compound and they build on one another. And so you get to a point where like there is an explosion of assets and one explosion that was particularly useful for me was the explosion of the availability of data. And that's where I got into the tech world. I was working in diplomacy. I had a few years at the UN and worked at UN University, did some work at the World Bank, worked in consulting for a year. And then I kind of saw the writing on the wall. And I'm like, a lot of the work that I've been doing is using data to help policymakers and business leaders make better decisions. It sounds like I could be a data scientist if I really wanted to. Like, could I get this math thing down, probability, statistics? Yeah, I think I could get it down. I think I could figure this out. Can I learn how to program? Yeah, I think I could do that too. And so before long, I became a data scientist. And that problem that I was solving as a professional was, you have a lot of data, you don't know how to find it, you don't know how to make sense of it. I'm going to help you. But then that problem became solved. And like the algorithms that people use to make sense of data, they were no longer like custom coded anymore. They became like standard machine learning models that are just out of the box. They became parts of products that automatically did it. All you have to do is be like a lazy person that uploads a CSV and you get all your analytics. And became easier and easier. And so the goalpost kept shifting because the technology that was once a frontier problem that needed custom thinking, now it was taken for granted. So now it became like, all right, we need machine learning engineers. Now we need LLM engineers. Now we need AI, ML operations. And the goalposts keep shifting as the complexities of the world shift. So that's going to be a given no matter what stage of technology that we're in. And people that are thinking about what jobs to pursue or what companies to start, it's always going to be incredibly useful to stay versatile and dynamic and adaptive, and to keep a broad perspective that what's trendy today might make you a lot of money, but that window might be narrow. At the same time, there are like commonalities, like universal themes of opportunity that will like always be evergreen on the market. And I think Jeff Bezos offered us a really useful way to think about it. He's like, when I was coming up with Amazon, I thought like, what are the things that we should prioritize in building this company? And like, no matter what changes in the world, the technologies might change, consumer preferences might change. What's trendy today may not be trendy tomorrow. But like, customers are always going to want things inexpensively, and they're always going to want them fast. Mm-hmm. And so I think what has been helpful as I've grown in my career is thinking not about like how can I fit into a trend, but how can I understand the things that will never change. And that will help you to make the most value of the time that you're in, the technologies that are prominent, and whatever trends happen to be popular as well.
No, I completely makes sense, right? And that story is like resonates with me so well, right? No matter what technology stack you use, like, customer is always going to want something faster and cheaper. So let's build our processes around that. And today that might be warehouse optimization, and maybe in 10 years it's AI, right? Which is kind of where we are now. But I also think that there are situations, like, let me give an example. If you're a startup that's working in the AI space and you're trying to come up with your product market fit today, you're deciding which LLM model you are going to build off of until you can build your own, for example, right? You're doing your early validations. What are some of the risks that they should be aware of, right? Like I think there's some really realistic challenges of like being out-featured by some of the base like LLM models, right? And so like, do you see it that way? And I think that to me, like, you do have to consider that as a business risk at an architectural level, right? Is that going to happen today? Is that going to happen in a year? Is that going to happen in 3 years? It's like, how can a company that is in this space or about to be in this space be thoughtful about those types of decisions that impact their long-term trajectory and increase their likelihood of success? Hopefully I asked that in a...
Let's make sure that we're answering the same question. Are you asking how can you consider the right features in a model that you're developing so that it remains competitive compared to what other people are building in the same space?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. I think there are several competitive levers to consider, and only one of those levers as a category is going to be the features that go into a model. I think very often a less performant model is going to win as part of a company because overall the company is more competitive in a comprehensive set of ways. Sometimes it's going to be the marketing behind the product. Sometimes it's going to be the user friendliness of the product. Sometimes it's going to be the customer service and how retentive the company is for people that sign up to use it. And sometimes, yes, you'll have like a less performant model be outweighed or rather it might exceed the performance, or it might be one lever in the competitive assessment as it stacks up against another model or another product. But it might still win. The company behind it might still win because they understood how each of these levers work together with one another. So think of it like a marketing funnel, right? Like you need people at first that are interested in your product. You need people that are going to register or download your app or subscribe. You need people that are going to pay and continue to pay. You need people that are going to use it and tell their friends about it. Like only one part of that is going to be like how performant is your model. Secondly, sometimes people don't even notice, man. Like I can ask you, like, what do you like more, ChatGPT or Claude? To be honest, it probably doesn't matter like 99% of the time. If you're asking it like, hey, like I need you to rewrite this email so that I sound polite, they're probably both going to do a pretty good job. Probably, like 99% of the time. So, yeah.
I was going to say, yeah, I agree as a consumer. But it does matter to Claude. It does matter to the OpenAI team. What's the percentage of my market share that I own? And so if I'm a company that has a software product, right? How do I try to like be mindful of those things? That, hey, like, can I get out featured by ChatGPT in a year? Mm-hmm. Right? Can they do what I'm doing today by just having another industry vertical? What's my moat, right? How do you advise someone that's trying to develop a business in these different industry verticals? Because I think that's the thing that I've seen the most challenging for companies that are trying to build in this space. Yeah.
There's a few ways to think about it, man. And like on one level, let's say you built a model that was more performant than ChatGPT on some metric that was meaningful. Again, it's like, do people know that you've accomplished this? And then do people care? And I think that's its own area. Like marketing is different than the performance of your model. They are fundamentally different things. Narratives mean everything in a competitive landscape. The second thing I would think about though is, let's say you're building a product that relies on large language models. Most of the time, you're not building a large language model. Most of the time, you are utilizing one that already exists. And so there's like a prioritization of how you would do that. And these levels of priority are not mutually exclusive. They do overlap. But at the level that demands the most control, and again, like this is what I do with companies like outside of HabibiTech through my consulting work. But what you begin with at a most foundational level is quite literally building a foundation model. This is where you build an original large language model, such as GPT-5 or DeepSeek or so forth. Most people will never do this. It's extremely expensive, extremely resource intensive. You're not going to need to. But let's say you wanted to use a model that already exists and you wanted to apply it. Right? Let's say you wanted to use a model that exists and apply it to your use case. There's ways to do this. Number one, you could fine-tune that model. And that basically means augmenting the model that you have. As an example, DeepSeek, right? You're using an open source model and you're fine-tuning it with your augmentative data set. And you are retraining the weights of the original model. Like you are changing its internal workings, right? The math and the intuitions of the model itself. You are coming up with a new model, even if it is derivative of the first one. But the model is different as a result of your fine-tuning. And that's closely related but different than what we call a RAG system, right? Which is retrieval augmented generation. This is where you have a model and you're happy with it for the most part. You think it's pretty smart, but you don't think it has the knowledge that's necessary to solve your problems. For example, let's say you wanted to build a chatbot within a financial institution that answered questions about your internal proprietary data. You don't want to retrain the model. You don't want to fine-tune it. Or maybe like fine-tuning is not practical because you constantly have a new stream of data every few minutes, added to your Dropbox, your proverbial directory, literal directory. But fine-tuning and retraining your model every couple of minutes is expensive, it's time consuming, and it would not be fast enough. So what you want to do is you want to basically allow your model to access a directory and say, hey, you're great the way you are, but I need you to also consider that you have this big folder over here, and when you don't know the answers, I want you to tap into this folder, and you're probably going to find the answer to the question that you're looking for. That's a retrieval augmented generation. These are not mutually exclusive, right? A company that's really thorough about how they are building their systems, in rare cases, they might build their own foundation model. More likely, they might use a combination of fine-tuning and retrieval augmented generation. They might fine-tune it so that it's not a general purpose model anymore. It's a finance model. It's a medical model. It's thinking like a doctor through and through. But the data that's available for it to answer timely questions, or maybe patient-facing questions or client-facing questions, that data is constantly changing every few minutes. So we're adding to the corpus of lively available data through a RAG system. And then the final stretch is like your prompt engineering, just giving it like a system command. Hey, by the way, just keep these 3-4 things in mind. The reason you wouldn't always rely on that is, number one, like your context window, like the things that you're able to tell it, it's limited, right? And the performance that it has on a limited context window, or even if you max it out and these context windows are increasing, it may not perform as well as RAG when it's more strategic about the data that it retrieves and keeps in memory. When you overload it, it's not always as strategic with how it allocates its priority of that information. And then finally, it's expensive. Like, you're using more tokens with large context windows than you would be if you're providing it with smaller amounts of information using like a surgical RAG approach. So these are all tools that are available to startup founders, CTOs, and so forth to design a system that is meaningful and works for them.
Okay, we really appreciate your time. It's been a really good conversation. I think what you're doing is like so important in terms of getting thought leaders together, especially for something so transformative.
Thank you.
May Allah bless you, the journey, put barakah in it, and everyone who is supporting of something like this. Like, I think it's important for us to kind of stand up with our chest puffed out and trying to, I don't know, I feel like for some, my thought process is like, we as Muslims have helped so many startups grow in this country particularly. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's a hotbed of innovation, and we have so much opportunity, but sometimes I think we don't know how much opportunity that we have here. Like, if you talk to people internationally, like, we're so privileged and so blessed. And sometimes I don't think we recognize those things. And then I think you take the advent of being in the technology sector, and then also being in the advent of knowing about where the industries are going and how so we're at an inflection point, and we as a community have an opportunity to decide, do we want to stand up and work hard and position ourselves where we can make important decisions like the paper, right? How do we want to influence it, or do we want to let that opportunity escape? And it's people like you that are trying to get us in the right track. So may Allah bless that journey. Amen. If there is someone that is, for the folks that are attending HabibiTech, or the folks that can't attend, what is like one key takeaway that you would want them to leave with coming out of the conference?
Be bold. I think that's the main theme that we want to drive in. On the macro level, this is a time that demands us to get out of our seats. A lot of change is happening, whether we sign up for it or not, but the direction that change has and the impacts it has on our families, our communities, our countries back home, if we're from outside of the country, it's real, and it's not going to go away if we just decide to ignore it. We need to act boldly. We need to assume our responsibility, and it's not just like a, mashallah, that brother's so... This is what we call in Islam a fard kifaya. This is a communal obligation. And what that means is, if enough people take up that responsibility on behalf of the community, then we're good. Alhamdulillah, we've done our job, and we've satisfied the need for leadership. But if not enough people sign up for a necessary task, but there were people who could have, then everyone is held accountable. And right now, we don't have enough people that are signing up to satisfy our collective need to define and chart a path for Muslims to lead in AI. We don't have people that are thinking about the complex questions. We have Muslims that are very good in individual roles, whether that's being a doctor, lawyer, engineer, or whether that's being a founder, running an effective company, mashallah, making a killing, maybe even doing it with a halal business model, but they aren't thinking beyond that. How can they transform the ethos of an industry? How can they mobilize other Muslims to think more boldly and to remember our context and our place in the grand story of history? Somebody needs to do that. And I hope that HabibiTech Summit invites people to accept their power, because we do have power. We have such privilege, like you mentioned. We have such opportunity. But are we using it to the fullest capacity that we can? And the last thing I would consider is sometimes people don't want to do the thing for the collective because they want to prioritize their own needs. And subhanAllah, sometimes when you focus on the collective, even if it's for a part of your time, you can lift the tide for everyone, including yourself, more than if you only focused on yourself. So keep your head high as a Muslim who has the best values, that has an ambition, has a work ethic, has a sense of integrity. If you are your best self as a Muslim, everyone will want to work with you. They will want to be a part of the value that you're creating. And you can create an excellent company, an excellent product, an excellent team in terms of its integrity and in terms of its impact. So let's build the best that we can, whether it's on the financial side, the economic side, the mercantile side. Let's do what we're excellent at, and let's be leaders, and let's broaden our vision so that we are aspiring for more than what we're aspiring to for now.
That's awesome. Okay, I've got one last question, and then Naveed, you can take us out. HabibiTech, the name. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think like even when I heard it first, I was like, man, are we supposed to be at this thing? We're two South Asian like folks.
Yeah.
So I would love to give you the opportunity to like provide that context and what kind of the thought process behind the naming convention as well. Yeah. I mean, of course we're here, we're supportive. I think I've seen some of your videos on it, but we would love for you to kind of talk a little bit about that message for the purpose of this podcast as well.
I mean, there's like a pretty simple inception story behind HabibiTech. When I first got into the tech space, when we talked about this at the start of the conversation, I came from a different industry, and I was used to finding mentorship in those other industries that I worked in, consulting, diplomacy. But when I got into tech, I really didn't have people to turn to. So I struggled for a couple of years to find my own footing in the industry. Made a ton of mistakes, wasted a lot of time, did things that I didn't need to do. But after a couple of years, I realized like, hey, like I'm kind of getting a hang of this. And I found myself in a position to offer some words of advice to folks that were just starting out that I knew would have benefited me if I was in their shoes, like I once was. So one day, like we're all doing LEET code questions, we're trying to get jobs, and we were working out of a Moroccan coffee shop or a Moroccan cafe in Midtown. And like, it was me and a Lebanese friend and then like an Albanian friend that just became Muslim. And like we kind of just, we were doing LEET code questions and we kind of just like tossed the word Habibi around all the time because, between the three of us, the dominant, secondary language in the room was Arabic. But like, everybody was like, in New York, everyone's a Habibi. You say it to your bodega guy. It's a common word, right? It's made its way into hip hop. So the idea came. I'm like, why don't we have conversations? Like, first of all, coding in a Moroccan cafe was like a vibe. I'm like, why isn't this a thing? Like, why don't people do this all the time? Now it's coding in a Yemeni coffee shop. So the culture shifted, but I'm like, this is a vibe. And then we just kept throwing the word Habibi around all day. Where I'm like, all right, like why don't we create like a structured environment for this where more people can join us because this is such a vibe, and we'll have talks in this dimly lit Moroccan style environment. We'll invite speakers from these big tech companies or founders of companies, how they've managed to tread their own paths towards success, and we'll learn from each other the same way that we're doing it right now, peer to peer. We're all here to learn from one another. And then COVID happened. And like meeting in person was not really a thing. But the idea stuck. I'm like, we can't meet in person. But everyone and their mom was on the same app at the same time. If you guys remember Clubhouse. Yes. And I'm like, this is like the least expensive way to prototype an idea I've ever seen in my life. So we made a room on Clubhouse and we called it HabibiTech. And we're like, hey, let's just see if people show up. Wallahi, hundreds of people showed up from around the world. A lot of them were in the New York area. A lot of them were from across the states. Some from Europe. Some from Dubai. And like, imagine the time differences. Like, we're starting at like 9 p.m. every Tuesday night or Monday night, whatever it was. And like 500 people would show up across the night. And some of them were like I can't sleep. I'm in Dubai right now, but I didn't see anything like that. I'm like, bro, you're in Dubai. You don't find Muslims in tech? Like, you can't find anyone? I'm like, maybe there are Muslims in tech, but they aren't thinking about how to develop Muslim leadership in tech. Like, those are two completely, they're developing leadership and a bunch of people are Muslim, but they're not combining the identities. It's just like, how do we just get ahead in our careers? It's still individualistic. It's taking the Islamic identity component for granted. Over the years, we developed a community that became more and more embracing of our niche, which is developing Muslim leadership in tech. And we applied it to things that range from startup pitches to in-depth panel discussions and networking events that focus on leadership. And that's our niche. That's what we do. That's what we focus on. But the origin story is as simple and as fun as it sounds, you know. The funny part was, like, not even everybody in that room was Muslim. Like, one person just became Muslim like 2 weeks before that. I think he like married a Pakistani person, so he had to become Muslim, and he's like, whatever, I'll stick with it. And then the other person was Lebanese, but they were not Muslim. They were Christian. So sometimes, you know, the origin story is not that complicated. That just happens to be ours. And we embrace it. Now, you might think, you know, is Habibi still an overly Arabic name? Well, listen, you know, like, if you really wanted to get spiritual about it, one of the names of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was Habibullah, right? The beloved of Allah. And is there anything more Islamic than the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself? So there's always a way to weave our tradition into things that we find valuable. And I'll leave it with that, inshallah.
Well, Ramy, Jazakallah khairan for making it onto the Caravan podcast. It's been wonderful to have you with us. Ramy Noaman, the founder of HabibiTech here in New York City, from a Moroccan tea house to hopefully bigger things here in New York. So thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you guys so much for having me.